Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr President. In my maiden speech in this place, I talked about democracy and the value of democracy and what we should be doing and what are democratic behaviours, and quoted an ancient philosopher who indicated that democratic behaviour is doing those things that protect and defend democracy and the values that it is. Now, in Australia, one of the great values that we have is freedom. We have freedoms of speech, we have freedom of the media, and we have freedom of religion. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights points to the fact that every person should have the freedom of their own religion, belief or conscience, in fact the freedom to not have a religion at all, or the freedom to change a religion if they wish to. Here in Australia, the working out of those freedoms we see every day. As a Member of Parliament, you often get invited to community events, whether that be members of the Buddhist community, the Hindu community. Just recently we had the National Open Mosque Day here in Australia, where people could interact with members of a different religious group. Not all the world, though, enjoys that freedom, and that does have its impact on Australians. I've spoken here before about John Short, an Australian, in fact a South Australian, who's lived and worked in Asia for many years, who was arrested at the start of this year in North Korea purely on the basis of his faith, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of people who are incarcerated in North Korea purely on the basis of their faith. Graham Staines, an Australian who had worked for decades in India working with lepers and the poor, who was burned alive with his sons in 1999 purely because of his faith. And more recently we see in northern Iraq and Syria, but particularly in places like Mosul in June, July this year, the Christians, the Shabaks, the Turkmen, the Yazidi, the Shia and others who have been murdered through crucifixion, beheading, who've been expelled from their homes, who've been subjected because of their faith. The extreme of this we see in a case like ISIL or Daesh in northern Iraq, but we also see where societies have not worked actively to preserve the freedoms that things like Article 18 give. We see the long-term impacts, and a lady called Asia Bibi is a current case in Pakistan. She's in her mid-40s. Working in a field, she chose to have a drink of water from a bucket. She happens to be a Christian. The other women who were there said that by her dipping her cup into that water, she had made it unclean. They got into a debate about faith, and because she defended her position as a Christian, they accused her of breaking their blasphemy law. And that law makes it a crime to in any way speak against Islam or the Prophet Muhammad. She has been in jail for some time now, and just recently the highest court upheld her death sentence. So she is now due to be executed by hanging for no other crime but her faith and the fact that she dared to speak out in defence of her faith and has been hauled into court, in fact quite violently at the time, by people in her community, and that's been upheld by their legal system. Now, one of the problems that people in Pakistan face, and there are many others in this situation, is that once that freedom is let go of, and once you start getting laws like blasphemy laws, groups who seek to impose their solitary view of the world as being the only right view, you start getting pressures that extend beyond the legitimate government of the day. And one of the problems that advocates in Pakistan have, whether they be human rights advocates, whether they be defenders of a particular faith, whether they be members of parliament, is that often members of the judiciary, in this case of this lady, a member of parliament who stood up for her, was executed. Somebody walked into his office and shot him. You often see judges or courts who release people who've been accused of blasphemy, then physically attacked and threatened because of that. And so the whole role of advocacy becomes quite difficult for those people, because it's not just the law of the land, that applies, but people in the community feel empowered to take that into their own hands. And so it's incumbent on the international community in those cases to step up and to actually shine a light onto that and to start advocating with the authorities in those countries to preserve what nearly all nations have signed up to in theory, which is Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In June this year, I was privileged to go to the United Kingdom for the inaugural meeting of a group known as the International Parliamentary Panel for Freedom of Religion, Belief and Conscience. This was put together by two core groups, the UK Parliament, just as we have friends of groups, friends of defence industry or friends of Israel, etc., friends of mining here. They have all-party groups, and there's an all-party group there for freedom of religion and belief, and in the United States there's a US Commission. So this is a formal government body that's charter is to work towards and support and encourage and engage in dialogue with other nations, as well as to inform the Congress and the Senate and the Executive about issues around religious freedom. Now, these two groups have brought together this International Parliamentary Panel. We had the initial meeting at the beginning of this year, and just a weekend ago in Oslo, the formal launch of the group and the charter that goes along with that. So some 30 parliamentarians from around the world, from nations from South America, Argentina and Brazil, from Asia, nations such as Burma, from Canada, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Germany, Italy, Malaysia, Nepal, Norway, Pakistan, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Turkey, the United Kingdom and Uruguay were there in Norway at the Nobel Peace Centre for the formal launch of the IPP and the signing of the declaration. Now, the intent of this group, being a parliamentary group as opposed to an arm of government, is that rather than having to seek government's permission to speak up, because governments often have to deal with the broader diplomatic issues and sensitivities, these parliamentarians are working to an agreed, coordinated agenda to raise awareness in their own countries, but importantly also to coordinate writing to ambassadors and indeed to heads of nations to raise concern where they see an issue in their nation. So to date, since Oslo, letters have been sent to Burma about issues faced by the Rohingya people there on the basis of their religion, as well as letters to the Prime Minister in Pakistan raising concerns about the blasphemy laws and about the lack of freedom of religion and belief in that country. And so I welcome the fact that so many diverse nations, people from their parliaments have chosen to participate. There are a range of people who don't have a particular religion, those who come from the Islamic religion, as well as Christians who are members of this. And I recognise that for people from countries such as Australia, where we enjoy freedoms of religion, it's not an impost, it's not a threat to us to go to those things, it's an opportunity to contribute. But for some people who actually attend and dare to challenge the norms in their country, that a citizen there should be free to choose to change their religion or to not have a religion, that is literally a matter of life and death for some of those people. And I think it's quite important that as we become more aware of those situations overseas, that not only do we advocate where we can to support them and to bring that civil society, that civility to all nations, but most importantly, it should spur us on every day to look for those things that are the important elements of the freedoms that we enjoy here in Australia, that underpin our plural, liberal, secular form of government that gives all Australians the freedoms to belong and to participate and to make sure that we defend those.